Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. This time, we're heading way up north to the Arctic.
Yep, to explore the incredible world of the polar bear.
A creature that has basically perfected the art of surviving in one of the most extreme environments on the planet. I mean, come on, they live where it's basically frozen all the time.
It's
But how do they actually do it?
Well, that's what we're here to find out.
All right, so when we think polar bear, we picture like this massive white giant blending in perfectly with the snow and ice, right?
Right, like the ultimate camouflage expert.
Exactly. But is that the whole picture?
Not quite. You see, their fur, while it looks white, it's actually transparent.
Wait, what? Transparent? How does that even work?
Think of it like this. Each hair is like a tiny little fiber optic cable. They channel sunlight down to the skin.
Okay, that's kind of cool. But wouldn't that make them, like, glow in the dark or something?
Oh no, because here's the really interesting part. Their skin is actually black.
Black. So wait, are you telling me polar bears are secretly goth?
Not exactly. It's all about absorbing heat. That black skin soaks up as much solar radiation as possible.
Like a natural solar panel.
Exactly. It's a pretty genius way to stay warm in a place where the sun barely rises for part of the year.
Wow, so they've got built-in heating. But I still can't imagine that fur, even with the whole solar panel thing, is enough to withstand those Arctic temperatures. It gets ridiculously cold up
But
there.
you're right, it's not just the fur. Underneath all that, they've got this thick layer of blubber.
Blubber. Like whale blubber.
Yeah, pretty much. It can be up to like 10 centimeters thick in some cases.
Whoa, that's a serious insulation layer.
It is. It traps their body heat and keeps them warm, even when they're swimming in like freezing cold water.
So they've got the solar panels and the blubber, a two-pronged defense against the cold. But surviving in the Arctic isn't just about staying warm, right? They need to find food, too, and that seems like a pretty tough job in such a desolate landscape.
You're absolutely right. And unlike a lot of other bears that hibernate through the winter, polar bears are active year-round. That means they gotta hunt pretty much constantly.
So no long winter naps for these guys. What's on the menu for a polar bear anyway? What do they eat to fuel all that energy?
Their main source of food, and it's a critical one, is the ringed seal.
Ringed seals, those cute little guys we always see poking their heads out of the ice.
The very same. And they are essential to the whole Arctic ecosystem.
And for polar bears, I'm guessing they're like the ultimate high-fat, energy-packed meal.
Exactly. It's what they need to survive in an environment that demands so much energy just to stay alive.
Okay, so we've got these apex predators living in a frozen world, hunting for these slippery seals. How do they even do that? Paint us a picture of a polar bear hunt. It can be easy in a landscape like that.
It's pretty remarkable, actually. Polar bears have developed these really fascinating hunting techniques. And what's really cool is that they change their approach depending on the season.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
Yes.
Seasonal hunting strategies, that's smart. So what happens in, let's say, winter?
Okay, so picture this. It's the middle of winter, the ocean's frozen solid, and there's thick ice everywhere. Ringed seals, they need to breathe, right? So they make these little dens in the snow drifts near breathing holes.
Right, so they're like these little hideaways, but also kind of traps, I guess, if a polar bear happens to find one.
Exactly. And polar bears, they've figured this out.
Okay, so how do they find them? Do they just sniff them out?
Their sense of smell is phenomenal, don't get me wrong. They can smell prey from miles away, literally. But in this case, it's a combination of smell, sight, and, believe it or not, sound.
Sound, really.
Yeah, they listen for the subtle sounds of seal pups inside the dens. Plus, they look for telltale signs like the breathing holes themselves.
So they found a den. Now what? It's not like they could just waltz right in.
This is where things get a little, shall we say, forceful. They use this technique we call the Hulk smash.
The Hulk smash. Seriously, tell me they don't actually turn green.
No. Think of it like this. The polar bear, it rears up on its hind legs, and then BAM! It brings its massive paws crashing down onto the ice above the den.
Whoa, talk about brute force. That sounds effective, but also incredibly dangerous, both for the seal and the bear.
It's definitely not without risks, and honestly, it's not always successful either. Studies suggest they only actually catch a seal about 10% of the time.
10%? That's a pretty low success rate.
It is, but when they do manage to snag a seal, it's a massive calorie boost.
So high risk, high reward makes sense. But what about when the seasons change and the ice starts to melt? Surely they can't rely on the Hulk smash forever.
Nope, they've got to adapt. As spring comes around and the ice thins out, those dens become less accessible. The ringed seals, they still need to breathe, but now they're more vulnerable at the breathing holes themselves.
Okay, so a different season, a different strategy. What's the spring approach?
Instead of brute force, it's all about patience and maybe a little bit of luck. Polar bears will position themselves near a breathing hole, sometimes for hours, just waiting for a seal to surface.
Talk about a waiting game. That takes some serious stamina and focus.
It does. It's another amazing adaptation. Polar bears have incredible patience. They can stay perfectly still for ages until the perfect moment to strike.
So they're masters of both brute force and patience. It's amazing how their hunting techniques are so in tune with the subtle changes in the Arctic environment. But what about summer? That's when the ice really melts, right? What happens to the polar bears then?
Summer is definitely the toughest time for them. With so much open water, their main prey, those ringed seals, become way harder to catch. So they often shift their focus to bearded seals.
Bearded seals. Are they different from the ringed seals?
They are. Bearded seals tend to hang out on the remaining ice floes.
I see. So instead of waiting for seals at breathing holes, they have to actively hunt them in the water.
Exactly. And that means relying on their swimming skills.
Wait, polar bears can swim? I mean, I know they're powerful, but
Well, yeah, they're surprisingly strong swimmers. They use those big paws of theirs like paddles to propel themselves through the water.
so we've got swimming polar bears now. That's a new image for me.
Yeah.
But I bet it's not as easy as hunting on the ice.
You're right. It's much harder. Their success rate for catching bearded seals drops to like 5%.
Wow, that's a big difference.
Yeah.
So access to sea ice is really their lifeline.
Absolutely. Without it, their chances of finding enough food are drastically reduced, and that makes them incredibly vulnerable, especially with.
Climate change. Yeah, I was just thinking about that. We all know it's hitting the Arctic harder than pretty much anywhere else. And with shrinking sea ice, things are getting tougher for polar bears, right?
Sadly, yes. The Arctic is warming at twice the rate of the rest of the world. That means less ice, less time for hunting, and a lot more challenges for polar bears. It's a race against time for them to adapt.
We've all seen those photos of emaciated polar bears struggling to survive. It's a heartbreaking reminder of what's at stake. But before we get too gloomy, let's switch gears for a bit and talk about a place where polar bears and humans actually live pretty close to each other. Churchill, Manitoba.
Ah, yes, Churchill, the polar bear capital of the world. It's a fascinating example of, well, coexistence, even though it's definitely not without its complexities. Every fall, hundreds of polar bears gather there, waiting for Hudson Bay to freeze over so they can head out and hunt seals.
Wow, hundreds of polar bears all hanging out near a town. Sounds like a recipe for a disaster.
It definitely presents some unique challenges, you're not wrong. But the people of Churchill have actually adapted pretty incredibly. They've got all these safety measures in place.
But what? Do they have like a polar bear alarm system or something?
They do. There's a dedicated polar bear alert hotline that residents can call to report sightings. And get this, there's a policy of leaving doors unlocked so anyone caught outside can quickly duck into a building if a bear comes wandering into town.
That's wild. It sounds like they found a way to respect these animals while also prioritizing human safety. But what about the bears that get a little too close for comfort? What happens to them?
Well, Churchill has this unique facility. They call it the Polar Bear Jail.
A polar bear jail. That sounds like something straight out of a cartoon.
I know, right? It's not a permanent solution, more like a temporary holding area for bears that pose a risk. They keep them there until it's safe to relocate them away from town.
It's like a timeout for troublesome bears.
You could say that. It's a testament to how adaptable humans can be and to the efforts being made to coexist with these incredible animals.
It definitely shows we can find ways to live alongside wildlife, even when it's as powerful and potentially dangerous as a polar bear. But, and you hinted this earlier, the story of Churchill also highlights how complicated these interactions can be, right? We touched on the issue of intentional feeding earlier. Are there other examples of these complexities?
There are. One that always comes to mind involves some seemingly friendly encounters between polar bears and sled dogs.
Wait, polar bears and sled dogs? I thought they were like natural enemies. That seems like a recipe for, well, not a good time.
It does, doesn't it? But there have been observations, even images and videos captured, of polar bears and sled dogs in close proximity, seemingly playing together without any aggression.
Whoa, playing together. That's incredible. I mean, given their instincts, it's hard to imagine them being buddies.
It definitely challenges our assumptions, but, and this is important to remember, there's often more to the story than what we see on the surface. And in this case, it turned out the owner of the sled dog kennel had been intentionally feeding the polar bears.
So Not exactly a natural friendship then.
Not entirely, no. It raised a lot of questions about the ethics of human interference in wildlife behavior. Habituating wild animals to humans, even with good intentions, can have unforeseen consequences.
It's a reminder that we need to approach these interactions with a lot of caution and prioritize the well-being of the animals above all else.
Couldn't agree more. Understanding natural behavior and minimizing human interference is crucial for ensuring the long-term health of both the animals and the ecosystem.
Well, this deep dive is already full of surprises. From incredible adaptations that help polar bears thrive in the Arctic to the complex realities of human-wildlife interactions, it's clear there's so much more to learn about these amazing creatures.
Yeah, it can really mess things up. But getting back to those amazing polar bear adaptations, we've talked about their fur and blubber and those incredible hunting strategies. What other tricks do they have up their sleeve?
What else helps them survive in that crazy cold?
Well, their paws are pretty amazing too. Those big kind of webbed paws, they aren't just for swimming.
What else do they use them for?
They act like snowshoes, help them distribute their weight evenly so they don't sink in the snow.
Makes sense. They got to be able to move around easily on both land and ice, like having built-in all-terrain vehicles.
Exactly.
Speaking of amazing adaptations, can we talk about the cutest thing ever, polar bear cubs?
Oh yeah, the cubs are adorable.
But seriously, those little guys are born in snow dens. In the middle of winter, right?
Yep, usually 1 to 3 cubs per litter.
How do they even survive? It's got to be freezing in those dens.
Well, the dens are surprisingly cozy. The mother bear, she uses her claws and her body to dig out a den in a snowdrift, or sometimes a hillside.
So she's like a snow architect, building a little winter haven for her cubs.
Pretty much. And the entrance is usually small, which helps trap the heat inside.
So it's like a naturally insulated baby room.
Yeah, you could say that. It's a pretty ingenious way to create a warm and safe space in such a harsh environment.
But what about food? Those mama bears must need a ton of energy to nurse their cubs. Where does that come from?
It's actually pretty incredible. The mother, she relies on her stored fat reserves to produce milk for her cubs.
So she's basically living off her savings for a month.
Exactly. She often loses a significant amount of weight while she's denning.
Talk about a dedicated mom.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, spring arrives, the cubs start getting bigger, and mama bear's got to replenish those energy stores.
You got it. And that's when we see another cool hunting strategy, one that's particularly common for mothers with cubs. It's called the sit and wait approach.
Sit and wait. So instead of actively hunting seals, they just, chill out and wait for one to come by.
Pretty much. As the ice breaks up, the seals are forced to haul out onto the remaining ice floes to rest and breathe. And that's when Mama Bear makes her move.
She waits for them to come to her.
Exactly. She positions herself strategically near those haul-out spots and just waits patiently.
That's pretty clever. Conserves energy. And it's probably less risky than chasing seals around in the water, especially with cubs to protect.
It's all about efficiency, especially when you're a nursing mother.
So it's like a strategic game of patience, polar bear style. What about the cubs? Are they involved in the hunt at this point?
They're still learning. They watch their mom, try to copy her movements, and little by little, they start developing their own hunting skills.
Like a little polar bear boot camp, taught by the best in the business.
Exactly. But, even with their mother's protection, it's still a dangerous world out there for those cubs.
For sure, the Arctic is not a forgiving place.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the biggest threats they face?
Well, other polar bears, for one. Wolves are a threat too, and even Arctic foxes can be a danger to young cubs. Survival is never a guarantee, even with mom looking out for them.
It really highlights the constant struggle for survival in that environment. And as we talked about earlier, those challenges are only getting tougher with climate change.
Definitely. Those rising temperatures and shrinking ice cover are having a major impact on polar bear populations, and it's especially tough on mothers and cubs.
I mean, we've already talked about the shorter hunting season. How does that specifically affect mothers and cubs?
It all comes down to energy, right? With less time to hunt, mothers have less opportunity to build up those crucial fat reserves they need to survive the denning period and produce enough milk for their cubs.
So less hunting time equals less energy for mom, which means less milk for the cubs. And that can't be good for their chances of survival.
Exactly. It's a chain reaction, and unfortunately, it's a reality that many polar bears are facing right now.
It's a pretty sobering reminder of the interconnectedness of the Arctic ecosystem and the ripple effects of climate change. But amidst all of this, I think it's important to remember that polar bears are incredibly resilient creatures. They've been surviving in one of the harshest environments on Earth for a long time.
Absolutely. They've got this amazing ability to adapt, and they've been doing it for millennia.
It's definitely inspiring,
Mm.
but it's also clear that they need our help to navigate these new challenges that are coming at them so fast.
I agree. We need to work together to protect their habitat, address climate change, and give them the best possible chance for the future.
Well said. This deep dive has been a real eye-opener, revealing both the incredible adaptations of polar bears and the urgent need to protect them and their Arctic home.
And there's still so much to learn. We haven't even touched on their social behaviors or their fascinating communication methods. People often think of them as solitary creatures, but they actually have pretty complex social interactions, especially during mating season.
Oh yeah, well, tell us more about polar bear romance.
Well, male polar bears, they often travel long distances to find a mate. And their courtship rituals, they can be quite elaborate. The female will often lead the male on a chase, testing his strength and endurance.
So there's some drama in the Arctic love story,
Definitely. It's a fascinating display of power and determination. And once they've mated, the female is left to raise the cubs on her own.
which, as we've seen, is no easy feat.
Not at all. She's a true symbol of strength and resilience.
Speaking of mothers and cubs, one of the things we came across in our research mentioned this really strange phenomenon that's been observed in some polar bear populations, and it involves, wait for it, sled dogs.
Ah, yes. Back to Churchill, Manitoba. We already talked about how complex those human-polar bear interactions can be, but this observation takes things to a whole other level.
Yeah, we talked about intentional feeding and the polar bear jail, but what exactly have people seen happening between polar bears and sled dogs?
There have been some documented instances of them exhibiting, well, surprisingly friendly behavior toward each other.
Friendly, like playing together. I can't picture that at all. They're predator and prey.
It's definitely not what you'd expect. Some scientists think it might be a form of play, maybe a way for polar bears to check out the dogs without actually attacking.
Like a non-lethal way to figure out if they're a threat or a potential meal.
Maybe. Others think it could be a sign of habituation, especially in areas where polar bears have gotten used to being around humans.
I guess that makes sense. But either way, it's a reminder that there's still so much we don't know about these creatures and how they interact with their world.
Absolutely. And it underscores the importance of careful observation and minimizing human interference. Every encounter, whether it's with a sled dog, a seal, or even a human, can teach us something valuable about polar bear behavior.
It's all about expanding our understanding so we can better protect these incredible animals. And speaking of incredible senses, one last thing I wanted to touch on is the polar bear sense of smell. It's legendary.
It really is. They can smell prey, like those seals hiding in their dens, from over 20 miles away.
20 miles? That's insane. How is that even possible? Do they have some kind of super sniffer?
Well, it's all about their anatomy. They have a really well-developed olfactory bulb.
Olfactory bulb, that's the part of the brain that processes smells, right?
Exactly. And that, combined with their great hearing, allows them to navigate that vast, often featureless Arctic landscape and track down their food.
It's like having a built-in GPS system, but guided by scent.
It's pretty remarkable. And that sense of smell is essential for everything they do, hunting, navigating, finding mates, even detecting danger. It's a vital part of their survival toolkit.
This deep dive has been an amazing journey. We've learned so much about their remarkable adaptations, their complex behaviors, and the very real threats they're facing.
It really is. Like, everything about them is perfectly designed for that environment. It's pretty amazing how life finds a way, even in the most extreme places.
It's a testament to the power of evolution, for sure. But, as we've been talking about, all those incredible adaptations are being put to the test now, more than ever. The Arctic is changing so fast, and it's having a huge impact on polar bear populations.
No doubt about it. Shrinking sea ice, shorter hunting seasons, and even increased conflicts with humans, those are all signs that things are getting tough for polar bears.
It's a wake-up call for all of us, really. What we do or don't do about climate change, it's going to have a direct impact on the future of these amazing creatures. It's kind of overwhelming, to think about the scale of the problem.
It is. But we can't give up. Every effort we make to address climate change, no matter how small it seems, it all adds up.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not about being perfect. It's about doing what we can. Whether it's reducing our carbon footprint, supporting conservation organizations, or just spreading the word about what's happening to polar bears. We can all do something.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, and the more we understand about polar bears, the better equipped we are to speak up for them and fight for their protection.
Well said. This deep dive has been a real journey, hasn't it? We've learned so much, not just about how incredible polar bears are, but also about the very real challenges they're facing and what we can do to help.
It has. It's been a privilege to share this journey with you, and I hope it's inspired everyone listening to learn more and get involved. Polar bears and the whole Arctic ecosystem, they need our help.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of polar bears. Remember, their future is in our hands. Let's work together to make sure these amazing animals are around for generations to come.